Welcome. This event is hosted by IFIT's online narrative peacebuilding hub, which provides a wealth of resources like papers, videos, practice briefs, and toolkits on integrating narrative as a key component of peacebuilding and depolarization. The hub is the work of IFIT's Inclusive Narratives Practice Group in partnership with our in-country teams. Today, I'm going to share with you part of a research that we have been doing titled Narratives, Ethnicity, and Polarization, the case of the Luo and Kikuyu communities in Kenya, as part of our greater discussions on narratives, ethnicity, and polarization in the Kenyan context. Now, this work I did together with Professor Solon Siemens. It's a case study exploring how entrenched narratives between the Luo and Kikuyu communities fuel ethnic polarization in Kenya. The study was conducted in collaboration with Kenya's Directorate of National Cohesion and Values using IFIT's narrative framework. In looking at narratives, we used trees as a visual image of how a narrative would be, with roots looking or at bringing out the historical events, myths, traumas, or structural dynamics. The trunk being the dominant public narrative that we interacted with, and the branches being the social consequences in terms of policies or practices. We met with community leaders and local individuals from the Luo and Kikuyu communities, as well as what we called the other communities of Kenya, through focus group discussions we conducted in 3 sub-counties in Nairobi. We also used trauma-sensitive approaches to train the research assistants so they can be aware not just of the cultural issues that they will meet within the communities, but also to safeguard the ethical standards of our research. Now, there are 3 dominant narratives that emerged in this research. One was the narrative, the thinking that the Kikuyu, that is the dominant community, protects economic interests through political dominance. Now, this perception was particularly advanced by the Luo community, and other groups also contributed into what would be seen as strategic self-preservation of this particular group. What was noted, however, is that this perception fuels resentment and also exclusionary politics. The second dominant narrative that we interacted with was that Luo loyalty to their leader is weaponized. The Kikuyu participant perceived Luo political mobilization as being manipulative and economically disruptive. And there was mention that this kind of mobilization reinforces mistrust and block voting fears. The third one, which was generally mentioned by the other communities, was that land acquisition by the Kikuyu community is used as a tool of control. So land ownership is kind of symbolic of the marginalization, not just of the majority group, the Kikuyu itself, based on past or historical land question in central Kenya, but also control of the communities in which the Kikuyu find themselves. Kikuyus, on the other hand, did express their own historical traumas, particularly in terms of land displacement, which they feel have been largely ignored. So this study actually drew from several scholars, but one key thing that came out was the fact that there's a danger in single stories. This particular theme has been advanced by Adichie Chimamanda. And the study reinforced that there is need for pluralistic and morally complex narratives. And so having spaces where these narratives can be nurtured or can be present side by side by, let's say, using narrative assessment, understanding existing stories, and reshaping them from within as opposed to imposing them from above. So at this point, I would like to start by inviting the panelists to think with me about the issues of narratives in the Kenyan context from their own experience. And the first question I would like to reflect together with the panelists is, how do narratives drive polarization in Kenya? And in what ways does this polarization contribute to violence and also undermine democratic processes? So at this point, I would like to invite Mr. Josiah Musili to address this particular question.
Thank you for inviting us to take part in this webinar. It affords us an opportunity to share ideas on this very key aspect that determines relationships between communities in Kenya. From the onset, I would like to state that there are several narratives that relate to different communities in Kenya, other than even outside those that were considered in the research that we did together with CELAC on the Kikuyu and the Luo. Some of these narratives are localized in that they exist within certain locations. We can refer to those locations. Probably we can refer to counties, narratives that exist within those administrative units. Others are national narratives. And looking at the case of Kenya, you'll find that these narratives will, some of them are direct, narratives that are open. Everybody in society knows what each one of or the other society thinks about them. Others are indirect, they're not clearly pronounced. They are like in the background. And of course, they lead to conflict in many ways. They lead to conflict, particularly when it comes to election cycles, in that people are branded to belong to certain, there exist certain stereotypes relating to communities, so that even as we go to the election cycle, we already know that these people are likely to behave in a certain manner. And that, of course, leads to conflict. This conflict, like I said earlier, could be pronounced, open conflict in counties where we may have different communities residing, or it could be indirect conflict, maybe through social media and other forums. As it relates to how we deal with the conflict and how we deal with these narratives, I would say that from the perspective of government, there are different government agencies that have already put in place or employed different mechanisms to deal with these narratives, particularly in reference to election cycles. Like I said earlier, we have agencies like the NCIC and other security agencies that have early warning mechanisms that will seek out signs of conflict and try to address that conflict before it arises. Again, we we look at, because it's something that is known. It's not something that we just discovered. We have ways of preempting that conflict before it occurs, so that then mechanisms are put in place to address the same. The emphasis here is obviously trying to counter the narrative, or to harness that narrative, so that what comes out of it does not lead to open conflict, either during elections or during any other situation that could lead to conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tekla.
Hi, thank you, Sela, and thank you, Josiah, for giving us the background. I will focus on the Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission. One of the violence that was very deep happened in 2007 that threatened Kenya to degenerate into actually a genocide. Luckily, the African Union sent us the mediators led by the late Kofi Annan. And after mediation, they came up with 4 agenda items. Agenda 4 focused on dealing with long-term issues, historical injustices. And one of the commissions that was set up to look at this was the Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission, to investigate into historical injustices and gross violation of human rights that Kenya experienced right from independence, 1963, to 2008, when the peace agreement was signed. The hearings really provided a forum. We had participation of the public in halls, and we also journeyed with the media that aired what we were reporting on. And so what I can conclude and say that indeed the people who participated through this Truth Commission felt they had been heard. Some of the hearings were very emotional, but they really appreciated that. And more important is that we came up with a report. And in this report, we have recommendations on how to continue on healing and reconciliation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for laying that out. Now, I would like to actually invite Reverend Dr. Sam Kobia to share with us.
Thank you very much, Sela. First of all, I really want to say that I can take up from where Tekla has left off, because TJRC was the time-defined commission, short-term, and once it did its work, it came up with recommendations, and the NCIC is the one that is supposed to actually be the custodian of those recommendations from TJRC, so that because this is ongoing. So I think it's good that we can move from where Tekla left off. Now, narratives, of course, can be used for different things, for good or for ill. I would say that narratives have shaped the Kenyan society even before independence and after independence. Before independence, the narratives are the ones that defined and shaped identity and kinship and the belonging of various communities. But then what has happened today, the same narratives are used by politicians, by some media personalities, artists even, and the problem is that they are weaponized. And that is why, because they are weaponized, we see that the same narratives that were used at that time to define communities, today they are used for inciting people, and they are used in such a way that they can very easily lead to conflict. And this is so especially during election seasons, because we hear, the recycled slogans like they are always rigging elections, or it is our time to eat. So narratives can be weaponized, and that is why they are easily can lead to violence. And these aren't just words, they are triggers. We can consider them as triggers. They pit communities against each other. They fuel verbal abuse, online hate, and even physical violence. And this is what has happened. And as NCIC, we therefore deal with these issues not only during the electoral cycle, but on an ongoing basis. Now, the NCIC plays a frontline role in curbing these toxicities that we have seen. Hate speech management isn't just about prosecuting offenders. It's about prevention, it's about monitoring, it's about education. And that is why, as NCIC, there are at least 4 ways in which we now deal with hate speech as well as incitement. One is to monitor social media and vernacular radio stations for inflammatory content, and especially the FM radio today, because these are local languages. They are used a lot because they are the ones that can even talk of parables and proverbs and all that denigrate people, but they cannot be easily understood by the outsiders in a quotation marks. So we are using elders in the communities to monitor FM radio messages. The second way in which NCIC is dealing with this is to engage with influencers and artists to promote responsible messaging. What actually has happened is I do remember several cases where we summoned one was a musician who came, and after we talked with him, he apologized. He was very remorseful, but then he decided to be a peace ambassador. And now is one of those people that uses his talents in his music to actually help people. And therefore, he's a very effective peace ambassador today. Then, of course, we have we work with the law enforcement to investigate and prosecute hate speech. Now, we issue, of course, public warnings and summon individuals, etc., as I've said. So those are about 4 ways in which we deal with the offenders. Now, let me say 2 things about why polarization is really dangerous. One, it undermines democracy. How? The kind of polarization that we have seen has real consequences for democracy. They turn political competition into ethnic warfare. They make compromise feel like betrayal. Now, in Kenya, we have seen how this polarization leads into violence. Secondly, fear silences voices. Citizens avoid political discourses. They disengage from civic processes. So there is a disenfranchisement because of violence.
Thank you very much, sir. I think that was very useful. You have made us understand that narratives are not just stories, but indeed forces that shape our action, shape our belief, and with the politicians and the media coming in as intervening factors, this can actually be done at a very wide scale. So I want to ask another question that will piggyback on all the contributions that the panelists that you have made in relation to how narratives are experienced in the Kenyan context. The research we did actually reminded us of the dangers of a unifying, especially imposed narrative, a narrative imposed from the top. And one of the things we looked at in the study is our campaign that was called Najivunia Kuwa Mkenya. This campaign was meant to inspire national pride, but unfortunately, it fell flat because, it didn't reflect people's lived experiences. Instead, many people actually responded with Navumilia kuwa Mkenya, which means I simply tolerate to be Kenyan. A very powerful counter narrative that was born out of the frustration, of that particular narrative. Now, looking at these limitations, my question to you all is, what strategies then can, whether state or non-state actors, do to transform narratives so they can mitigate the harmful impacts of these narratives on the Kenyan society? And I want to start with Mr. Josiah Musili. How do you think state and non-state actors should actually go about transforming narratives for the better?
Thank you, Stella. And the example that you've given, it really fits the challenge that we have, both as state and non-state actors, when you try to address the issue of narratives. The challenge therein is because the campaign, Najivunia Kuwa Mkenya, probably left out key considerations, including involvement and collaboration with the communities that were supposed to buy into this narrative so that they can practice and counter any other narratives that would have been considered to disrupt peace or to bring conflict. So involvement of communities and collaborating with those communities, it's very important. Secondly, there is need for collaborative efforts, and I would want to give an example of the work that we did with IFIT to find solutions on the way to address these narratives, or the way to harness the narratives and find solutions to what can be done to deal with the possible conflict that results from the narratives. Secondly, we need to identify or map out the narratives that exist so that we are not just throwing in counter narratives without addressing the already existing narratives that are supposed to be countered by what we are proposing or what we are coming up. So mapping is important. Identifying those narratives is important, so that then you can find solutions from a point of knowledge, not just acting on stereotypes that exist. Of course, society has all these kind of stereotypes, and not necessarily all stereotypes or the narratives lead to conflict. There's also a need to build a critical mass of stakeholders with skills to deal with narratives as defined in the study that we conducted. With this kind of critical mass, then you have this community of persons that understand how to deal with this challenge, or how to deal with these negative stereotypes that exist in society. Also, there's need to develop policy with narratives in mind. It is one thing just to have ad hoc counter narratives without any policy backing what you're trying to do. So when you just come up with Najivunia Mkenya and there is no policy behind what you're coming up with, then it's likely to be just a one-off. It's likely to die within a very short period of time and will have no lasting impact. That policy then, of course, leads to institutionalizing narratives as it were, so that then we know what is it that we are addressing and what are these solutions that we are proposing through policy. And at this point, probably I'll also mention, like my colleague Tekla said, that the directorate is also a product of the Agenda 4 process. And the main reason why the directorate was created or established was to deal with policy issues. And there then the institutionalization of approaches that we want to use to counter all these issues that bring about conflict in our society. That I would say the 3 or 4 key ways in which state and non-state actors can counter strategies that can be used to counter or transform narratives in society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Tekla, what's your take on this?
The TJRC process put Kenya as a nation in the mood for dialogue. What truth commissions usually do is only paint a global picture of what the nation is grappling with. And the time is usually very short. For example, ours was 2.5 years. We managed to do 4 years. But I think the commission had paved the way for national dialogue, and we missed that opportunity. How I wish that if its narratives on ethnicity and polarization should have come immediately. The Kikuyu, as you've said, and the Luo is just one tree. But as you've highlighted in your document, there are various small trees. So I think we missed that opportunity, but it's not late. What we've not done in Kenya is sustained dialogue at the community level. And so, for example, after I left the commission, I used to complain why the report was not being implemented, but I had the comfort in the National Cohesion and Integration Commission, in this directorate, and in the Kenya Human Rights Commission and other institutions that are looking at other things. But one thing that I felt passion about is social healing. The commissioners, we were told when we started, there were complainings that we were going to re-traumatize the community. We did not re-traumatize the community, but we only cleaned those wounds ready for healing. So for me, I felt so passionate about the trauma that Kenya had experienced through historical injustices. And we used Mount Elgon as one of the case studies to paint a global picture of ethnic tension and ethnic violence. So what I did was to go back to Mount Elgon with a small organization to continue the dialogue using social healing as an entry point. And through the process, I can see that the process really helped the community. And we did not just go to focus on the survivors or the victims, but we just created space using local administration. We just created space for the most affected, meaning that the most affected, even the perpetrators, were also part of the most affected. And the dialogues were very helpful. We revisited our historical injustices, the violence we have experienced, and how it affected the community. We used the images, we used our stories from the Bible, from the Quran, and we used our own traditional methodology of circle, just putting people in the circle. I think we need more of this, not just in Mount Elgon, but all over, if we can plan so well. But this needs resources. Again, the Truth Commission was treated as an event. It got finished, but funding, I think, has really been the problem. I don't know how much NCIC is funded, how much the directorate is funded. I think we need to focus this so that not just to wait for us to firefight around election time, but let's have sustained dialogue within the communities to deal with the historical injustices, to deal with the pain of the nation, and to find a way of helping communities to coexist. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Yeah,
Mhm.
Reverend Kobia, what do you think about this one?
Let me say that as NCIC, we consider peace building. And let me say that for us, peace building is part of our DNA. And so that is what we are using basically, I would say, to influence these situations. Through hate speech monitoring, inter-community dialogue, and civic education, we have consistently worked to counter divisive rhetoric and foster unity. But today, we recognize that naming this work is not enough. We must also equip ourselves with the tools and with the frameworks being used not only just in Kenya and East Africa, but globally to transform hateful narratives. We are part of the global community, and therefore we need to learn from each other, even beyond Kenya and Africa. This is a moment to learn, and not just from our own experience, but from the successes and the challenges of others working in similar contexts around the world. And I know that there are very many similar contexts. Let me say that I really appreciate what Mr. Musili has already outlined. And I would like to add another critical dimension to what he said, and that is this, that we must empower influencers and artists as narrative shapers. One thing that I always really like to see is that how through peace education, through even persuasion, we have those that have been inciting people and all that turn into peace ambassadors and cohesion champions. In Kenya, we know that musicians, comedians, and digital creators hold immense sway, often warning even our deepest struggles into tuning them into satire. And this is very interesting because people can learn more from such. But beyond entertainment, these voices can spotlight underrepresented stories, moments of shared struggle, quiet cooperation, and everyday solidarity across communities. These are very powerful. Now, let me also say that equally, and what is vital to this is investing in youth-led narrative innovations. Take Gen Z, for instance, who are not only just a demographic, but they are a movement. They approach narratives with critical thinking, challenges inherited in stereotypes, and they co-create new stories grounded in their lived realities and aspirations. And this is very important, whether it is from TikTok campaigns to spoken word performance. We have seen how young Kenyans are reframing tribal tensions into civic engagement. And that's very, very important for us. Universities peace, which what we call Amani clubs in universities. This is peace clubs in universities. They are the ones that we use, and we have seen how much they have turned the conflict into collaboration, and we must nurture and scale these efforts. Narrative transformation is not a signed project. It is central to cohesion, it is central to democracy and to peace. And as NCIC, we are continually learning that these are new ways in which we can clearly make a difference. Let me conclude here in this chair by saying that I really hope that particularly the Gen Z will help us at this time. I must say that since the death of the former Prime Minister of Kenya, the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, we had seen that week when we were mourning him, and in fact, it's only yesterday that the 7-day mourning time was ended. But we thought that Kenyans had come together. And in fact, we could see that we had come together. But in the last 3-4 days, a very unfortunate thing has happened. We are talking of these narratives and particularly polarization between Kikuyu communities and Luo communities. Yesterday, I had to issue summons to Governor of Nyeri, Governor Kahika, who really uttered things that have already created a lot of animosity between the Kikuyus and the Luos, because he said for them, they were celebrating the death of Raila. And he said that for them, they think now Kikuyus were going to be freer without Raila. But then went on to eject even some ethnic or tribal slide, in what he was saying. And then today I had to issue another summons to Governor of Homa Bay, Governor Gladys Wanga, because in retaliation, she herself went on to say that Ikuyus were now persona non grata in Lowland. I mean, here we have two very strong governors. In fact, one of them has been a vice chair of council of the Governor's Council. And of course, he has now been stripped of that responsibility. He himself clearly couldn't continue. So we have seen already this tension, which has been created by irresponsible utterances. And unfortunately, this is between the Kikuyus and the Luos. So there's a lot of work that we have to do. Just summoning them is not enough. What I hope is that we are going to at least try to make them realize the mistakes they have made, and then be remorseful and actually be prepared now to work for unity between the peoples, not only of the two communities, but of Kenyans in general.
Wow. Thank you so much, sir. I mean, this gives me the sense that our work is not just important, but urgent. And when I say our work, I mean narrative peace building. It's important that we continue supporting community-led narrative reframing, because narratives can only, be transformed from within. As we said, we cannot impose. And it also has given me an opportunity to appreciate the work that all of you are doing in your different offices. And the fact that we are even talking about how best can we handle this. This is an opportune moment for us to put all our hands together to work towards this goal. So I want to take this particular opportunity to thank you all panelists for your thoughtful insights, powerful reflections, and the generosity with which you have shared your experiences today, both bad experiences, which make us think a little more about this kind of society we are in, that make us also think about what contributions we are making to it. I like that we also mentioned about Gen Zs, because narratives also pass from one generation to another. And sometimes quite subconsciously, because children learn by emulation and by listening to what they are not being told. These conversations have illuminated the complexity of narratives, particularly in the Kenyan context, but have also shown us that there is urgent need for collaborative and transformative approaches. You all have challenged us to carry forward the energy, the ideas, the commitments, particularly between shared institutions, and seeing that, different government institutions are very committed to working towards this. it gives me hope that our everyday interactions, our communities, and eventually our narratives will be transformed for the better. So at this point, I just want to say thank you very much for being part of this important dialogue.